A 17-year-old girl walked into a SEAL base on Christmas Eve carrying nothing but a duffel bag and a name nobody recognized. 6 combat veterans laughed. They thought someone had made a mistake. They were right, but the mistake wasn't hers. Within 40 minutes, she had outshot every operator on the range. Within 6 hours, 3 men would be dead in the sand. And by morning, one of the most decorated officers in special operations would be in handcuffs. This is the story of Maya Voss, the girl they built into a weapon, and the man who forgot she could point it back at him. If stories like this are what you live for, subscribe right now, hit that like button, and drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The wind came in from the northwest that night, cold and mean and carrying sand that felt like ground glass against exposed skin. Black Ridge Desert Training Facility sat 40 miles from the nearest paved road, surrounded by nothing but scrubland and rock formations that looked prehistoric under a half moon. The facility itself was functional and ugly. Low concrete buildings, steel range barriers, floodlights mounted on poles that hummed and swayed in the gusts. Someone, years ago, had strung Christmas lights along the observation tower railing. Green and red bulbs, half of them dead, the rest blinking without rhythm against the dark. Nobody knew who put them up. Nobody had bothered to take them down. It was December 24th. Staff Sergeant Ethan Cole stood at the window of the operations room with a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago and watched the empty vehicle lot below. He was 31 years old, lean and angular in the way that men get when they've spent too many years burning more calories than they can replace. His team occupied the room behind him, 5 SEALs, all of them in various states of boredom. Petty Officer First Class Marcus Webb was doing push-ups near the far wall, counting under his breath. Petty Officer Danny Rourke had found a deck of cards somewhere and was attempting a solitaire game with no apparent strategy. Senior Chief Luis Carrera sat at the table with his feet up, reading a 2-month-old motorcycle magazine. 2 others, Torres and Haskell, were arguing about something involving a football game that had happened 3 weeks ago. They were all supposed to be somewhere else. Holiday duty at Black Ridge was the kind of assignment that fell to people whose paperwork wasn't in order, or whose commanding officer had a quiet grudge, or who had simply been unlucky with the scheduling board. Ethan had drawn it because of a disciplinary note that was officially classified as a counseling session, but which everyone above him understood to be a punishment. He'd challenged a superior's tactical call during a mission debrief. The superior had been wrong. Ethan had been right. Neither of those facts had changed the outcome. So here he was, Christmas Eve, 40 miles from anything. "What time does our shift end?" Torres asked. "Oh, 600, Carrera said without looking up. "How long is that?" "Long." Torres made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Ethan finished the cold coffee, crushed the cup, and dropped it in the trash can near the window. He was about to turn back toward the team when headlights appeared at the south gate, a single vehicle moving through the checkpoint without stopping. Whoever was driving had credentials that didn't require stopping. That caught his attention. He watched the vehicle, a black government SUV, the kind that had no plates worth reading, navigate the lot and stop outside the main entrance. The engine cut. One door opened. The man who climbed out was tall, composed, and moved with the particular deliberateness of someone who had spent decades believing that other people moved too fast. He was in his mid-50s, silver-haired, wearing a field jacket over his uniform. Even from this distance, even without insignia visible in the dark, there was something about him that communicated rank, the way a drawn weapon communicates intent. Ethan recognized him before he could see his face clearly. Colonel Adrian Cross. He'd seen Cross twice before, once at a command briefing in Kandahar, once at a medal ceremony in Virginia. Cross was one of those officers whose name appeared in the kind of articles that ran in serious defense publications, the kind that got passed around at senior staff meetings. Decorated, influential. A career built on successful operations in places that weren't officially acknowledged. The kind of man whose handshake meant something. What he was doing at Black Ridge on Christmas Eve, Ethan had no idea. Then the passenger door opened, and a girl got out. She was small, maybe 5'4", probably less. 17 at the absolute outside, maybe younger from a distance. She was wearing field-issue clothing that looked like it had been fitted for someone 3 sizes larger, sleeves pushed up, pant legs slightly too long. She carried a single duffel bag over her left shoulder, holding it with both hands. No backpack, no weapon, nothing else. Her hair was dark and pulled back tight. Her face was still, not the stillness of someone hiding fear, though Ethan wouldn't understand that distinction for several more hours. Just still. She looked at the facility the way a surveyor looks at a property line. Ethan turned from the window. Webb. Webb stopped mid-push-up. Yeah. Come look at something. By the time the rest of the team gathered at the window, Cross had reached the entrance and the girl was 2 steps behind him, walking with the quiet, measured pace of someone who had learned not to draw attention to themselves in motion. Torres leaned forward, squinting. Who's the kid? No idea, Ethan said. Is that Cross? Rourke asked. Yeah. What's Cross doing here with the... Rourke paused. How old is she? Nobody answered because nobody knew, and the question hung there while they all stared at a 17-year-old girl walking through the entrance of a special operations training facility at 11 o'clock on Christmas Eve. Ethan met them in the briefing corridor. Cross handed over a physical file without preamble or greeting, the kind of handoff that suggested he considered introductions a waste of time. The file was thin. Most of it was blacked out, redaction lines running across pages in thick horizontal bars that covered everything except dates, administrative reference numbers, and one visible data point. Age, 17. Candidate for evaluation, Cross said. Full assessment protocol. Marksmanship, adaptation, response under pressure. You'll run the standard range sequence and add the variable condition series. Ethan looked at the file. He looked at the girl. She was standing 3 feet behind Cross, hands at her sides, watching Ethan with an expression that gave him nothing. Not nervousness, not defiance, not the bright-eyed intensity of someone trying to impress. Just watching, processing, the way you watch something you've already made a decision about. Sir, Ethan said carefully, I want to make sure I understand the parameters. You want us to run a full evaluation on a candidate, Cross said. The file is what it is. You don't need more than that. I'm going to need authorization. Cross reached into his jacket and produced a single sheet of paper. Authorization signature at the bottom, classified header, the correct command seal. Ethan examined it. It was real. Everything about it was real. He looked at the girl again. Does she have a name? Cross glanced back at her, a fraction of a second. The kind of look that carries information if you know how to read it. Not fond, not cold exactly. Something else. Assessing. Tell him your name, Cross said. She spoke for the first time. Maya Voss. Her voice was level, quiet, but not soft. She said it the way you say something that isn't your only name, like she was confirming a detail on a form. Staff Sergeant Cole, Ethan said. I'll be running your evaluation. I know, Maya said. He wasn't sure what to do with that, so he didn't do anything with it. He turned back to Cross. We'll begin at 2300. Cross nodded once and pulled out his phone, already done with the conversation. I'll observe from the tower. He walked away. Maya stood in the corridor, alone now except for Ethan. He studied her for a moment, not rudely, but plainly, the way you study someone you're about to be responsible for in an environment designed to push limits. Have you eaten? He asked. A small pause, like the question surprised her. Yes? You need anything before we start? No. He nodded. Started walking toward the range. After a moment, she fell into step beside him, perfectly matched to his pace without trying. He didn't notice it then. He would later. Boom. The seals reacted the way Ethan expected them to. Webb saw her first and stopped walking. Torres walked into him. Rourke looked at her and then at Ethan with an expression that said very clearly, "Is this a joke?" Carrera set his magazine down, which for Carrera was significant. Haskell tilted his head. This is Maya Voss, Ethan said. Candidate for evaluation. We run the standard sequence, then the variable condition series. Full protocol. A silence that was not respectful. How old are you? Webb asked. 17, Maya said. Webb looked at Ethan. Ethan looked back at him with the flat expression that meant, do not. Webb looked at Maya again, then at the range equipment laid out on the staging table. His face was doing something complicated. You shoot before? Yes, she said. Where? Different places. Like where range camps, junior programs? She looked at him for a moment. Different places, she said again. Webb made a sound, not cruel, but not kind either. The kind of sound that means, okay, kid. He walked back toward his position. Torres quietly said something to Rourke that Ethan didn't catch and didn't ask about. Maya watched them. Ethan watched her watching them. Her face didn't change. The range was a 400-meter standard lane system with variable position targets, pop-up human silhouettes at fixed distances, timed sequences, a wind flag array that the range operator could control from the tower to simulate changing environmental conditions. The temperature had dropped to 22 degrees Fahrenheit. The gusts were coming in at 12 to 18 miles per hour, with occasional spikes that knocked sand across the lanes in sheets. Not ideal conditions, not impossible ones. Cross was in the tower above them, barely visible through the reinforced glass, standing with his hands behind his back. He'd been there since they arrived. He hadn't said anything through the range comm. The SEALs went first. This wasn't protocol. Normally, the candidate would shoot independently, but Ethan let it happen, partly because he knew his team needed to burn off the energy of their skepticism, and partly because he wanted Maya to watch them, to understand what she was being compared against. 6 operators, standard issue M24, zeroed at 300 meters, 24 rounds total between them, 4 each. They shot in sequence, smoothly and professionally, the way men do when they've been doing something for a decade and no longer have to think about the mechanics. Webb led, fast and accurate. Carrera shot left-handed for his last 2 rounds, showing off without making it obvious. Torres adjusted mid-sequence for a wind change without being told to, which was good instinct. When it was done, the range operator called their results through the comm. 18 out of 24. Every miss was within the 5 ring. No embarrassments. It was genuinely excellent shooting. Webb crossed his arms and looked at Maya. Not aggressive. Just communicating something. That's the standard, kid. That's what this place is. Maya was standing at the staging table. She'd been watching the team shoot with the same expression she'd worn in the corridor. Attentive, quiet, taking something in that wasn't visible on the surface. She looked at the rifle on the table, then at the wind flags at the far end of the range, which were snapping northeast in a steady pattern. Ready? Ethan asked. She picked up the M24. She didn't check her reflection in anything. She didn't roll her shoulders or shake out her hands or do any of the physical preparation rituals that shooters develop. She simply picked up the weapon and assumed a standing position at the firing line with a naturalness that was almost uncomfortable to watch, like watching someone pick up a tool they'd been using since before they could remember. She settled. Her breathing slowed. Ethan watched her chest, because he always watched chest when he was trying to read a shooter's state. And what he saw was unusual. She wasn't using a controlled breathing technique that she'd been taught. Her breathing just changed. Like a reflex. Like her body knew what was coming and adjusted without being asked. She looked through the scope. The first wind spike hit the range at 35 miles per hour. It lasted 4 seconds. The range flags whipped horizontal. She fired during the spike. The first target dropped. Torres said very quietly, "Huh." She fired again and again and again. 4 rounds, 4 drops. The range operator's voice came through the comm a second later. 4 for 4, all headshots. Candidate 1. Dead quiet on the range. Webb uncrossed his arms. Ethan changed the rifle. He pulled the M24 and replaced it with a different weapon. A Remington 700 and .300 Winchester Magnum. Different weight, different trigger pull, different balance. A meaningful change. Not the kind of thing you hand to a shooter mid-evaluation unless you're trying to make them fail. He watched Maya's face when he set it on the table. She looked at it. She picked it up. She adjusted her grip twice, small, specific adjustments. the kind that said she understood the mechanical differences and wasn't guessing. She settled into position. 4 more rounds, 4 more drops. Different weapon. Same result. "Candidate," Ethan said, keeping his voice neutral, "we're moving to variable distance." He changed the range configuration, targets at 100 meters, 250, 400, and a final one at just beyond 300 that was partially obscured by a metal barrier, requiring a specific angle. He watched her eyes track the layout when the targets appeared. She spent 6 seconds surveying, then she shot them in reverse order, farthest first, which was not the sequence most shooters used and which was, tactically, the correct choice. Webb walked over and stood next to Ethan. His voice was low. "She's not shooting for score," he said. "I know." "She's shooting like she's—" Webb paused. "Like she's training for something specific." Ethan didn't answer because he was thinking the same thing and didn't have language for it yet. There's a difference between a trained shooter and someone who shoots because missing is not an option. Technique looks the same from a distance. The feeling of watching them doesn't. He changed the position next, moved her to prone, then to a barrier support stance, then to an unsupported standing position with a crosswind running directly across the lane. Each change, she adapted. Not instantly, not flawlessly. She missed 1 round in the barrier series, a near miss that clipped the edge of the target frame. But the adaptation was fast and specific, like someone running a diagnostic rather than improvising. By the time they reached the end of the standard sequence, the team had stopped making sounds. Not impressed silence, though it was that too. More like the specific quiet of people who have encountered something that doesn't fit their existing categories and are waiting for their understanding to catch up. Ethan stood at the staging table with his clipboard, looking at the numbers. Maya set the rifle down carefully and stood with her hands at her sides, not looking at the score sheet, not looking at the team. She was looking at the win flags. "Candidate," he said. She looked at him. "Where did you learn to shoot?" A pause. Small. "My father taught me," she said, "when I was young." "How young?" Another pause. Something moved behind her eyes. Not pain exactly, but the echo of it. The way water moves in a glass after someone's already picked it up and carried it somewhere. "Young," she said. He wrote something on his clipboard that wasn't a score. Carrera came up beside him afterward, when Maya had stepped away to get water from the canteen table. He kept his voice low, the way the whole team had started keeping their voices low without deciding to. "That's not a candidate," Carrera said. "What do you mean?" "I mean, that's not someone being evaluated for a program." He looked across the range at Maya, who was standing at the canteen table with her back to them, looking out across the dark desert. "That's someone who's already done it, whatever it is." He paused. "The question is what Cross wants with her." Ethan looked at the observation tower. Cross was still there, still standing, still watching. Not watching the range, watching Maya. Midnight passed without ceremony. Christmas arrived at Black Ridge the way it arrived everywhere else, quietly, without explanation. The calendar turning while people were busy with other things. Someone on the range team had a small radio that played a carol for about 30 seconds before the signal dropped. Nobody commented on it. Ethan sat in the operations room with Maya's file open in front of him. He'd told his team to stand down for 45 minutes, standard rest between evaluation phases. Cross had retreated from the observation tower at some point. Ethan didn't know where he'd gone, which bothered him in a way he couldn't immediately explain. The classified vehicle was still in the lot, which meant Cross was still somewhere in the facility. He read what he could of the file. Most of it was useless. Administrative routing numbers, access code headers, classification stamps that told him the document existed without telling him what the document contained. The blacked out sections were total, not the partial redactions that left context visible around the edges. These were the deep redactions, the ones that meant someone had decided very specifically that the information beneath them should not exist. But there were gaps, small ones, in the margins and formatting, the kind that appeared when a document had been created at one classification level and then redacted to a lower one. Numbers that didn't match. A date that was 6 years earlier than the earliest visible record. a reference code that began with the letters VEIL, which Ethan had seen before in a completely different context, an internal program designation used by a specific type of operation. He almost missed the name. It was in the header of one of the blacked-out sections, visible only because the redaction didn't quite reach the left margin. 3 letters, the beginning of a last name. VAL. He stared at it for a long time. Then he typed the program code into the operations terminal with his access credentials and waited. What came back was not a file. What came back was a flag. A classified notification that said access to the requested material required authorization above his clearance level, that access attempts had been logged, and that if he had encountered this material in the field, he was to contact the originating office immediately. The originating office was listed as a division within Special Operations Command, Cross's division. Ethan closed the terminal. He sat in the quiet of the operations room with the sound of the wind against the windows and a 17-year-old girl's classified file on the table in front of him and tried to figure out what question to ask first. His radio crackled. Webb's voice from the range staging area. "Sergeant, you need to come to see something." Achad. He found Webb standing at the outer edge of the range, looking at the desert beyond the barrier fence. The floodlights ended about 20 meters past the fence, and beyond that was pure dark. The kind of dark that didn't exist anywhere near a city, heavy and total, the sky too clouded for stars. "What am I looking at?" Ethan asked. Webb pointed. At first, Ethan didn't see it. Then he did. A shape crouched at the fence perimeter, looking through the chain link into the dark. Small, motionless. Maya. She was at the perimeter fence in the space between 2 floodlight pools, crouched with her weight on the balls of her feet, completely still, looking out at the desert. Not toward the range. Not toward the facility. Out. Ethan walked over. He crouched beside her. "What are you doing?" he asked. She didn't answer immediately. She was still looking at the dark. "Something's out there," she said. He looked. He saw nothing. "What makes you think so?" The coyotes stopped. She nodded toward the hills to the east. There were 2 of them, working the scrub line. 40 minutes ago, they stopped. Something made them stop. Ethan looked at the hills. She was right that coyotes were common out here, though he hadn't been paying attention to them. He looked back at Maya. "You were tracking coyotes during your evaluation?" "I track everything," she said, like it was obvious. He studied the perimeter. Sand, rock, scrub, the wind running across everything equally, without preference. He didn't see movement, but he'd learned a long time ago that not seeing something didn't mean... The radio on his belt clicked twice. Then silence. Ethan froze. 2 clicks. No voice. That was a specific signal. Not a protocol they used at Black Ridge. It was an operations signal, the kind that existed outside of facility procedure. The kind that meant... He looked at Maya. She was already looking at him. In the floodlight's edge, her face was pale and absolutely still, and what he saw in her eyes in that moment was something he would think about for a long time afterward. Not fear, not surprise. Recognition. "Get inside," he said. "That's not going to help," she said quietly. "Get inside now," he said. She stood. She moved toward the operations building. Ethan keyed his radio and spoke fast and low, already reaching for the weapon at his hip, already running the geometry of the dark desert in his mind. Ranges, angles, cover, the placement of his team, the position of the vehicle, the last known location of... "All units," he said into the radio. "Stand 2. Unknown contact, perimeter east. I want everyone eyes up and weapons ready." Inside the operations room, lights were coming on. In the observation tower, where Cross had supposedly been watching them all night, the window was dark. Cross was gone, and Maya Voss stood at the entrance to the operations building, looking back at Ethan across the open ground between them, and said something he almost didn't hear over the wind. "He's already made his decision," she said. "What decision?" Ethan said. She looked at him for one more second. "About me," she said. Then she went inside. Ethan found her sitting on the floor of the operations room with her back against the wall beneath the window, knees pulled up, hands loose in her lap. Not hiding, not panicking, just Occupying the space the way a person occupies a space when they've learned that the worst thing you can do in an uncertain situation is burn energy you might need later. The rest of the team was at positions. Webb at the east window, Carrera and Torres running a quick perimeter check outside, Rourke and Haskell on the radio trying to reach the range operator who had gone quiet 12 minutes ago. The facility felt different now. The Christmas lights on the tower were still blinking through the window, green and red and pointless, and the wind was still screaming off the desert, but the room had the specific quality of air that's been changed by people who understand that something is wrong. Ethan crouched in front of Maya. "Tell me what you meant," he said. "Outside. What decision?" She looked at him. Her hands were still in her lap. "Cross didn't bring me here to evaluate me." "Then why did he bring you here?" She didn't answer immediately, not because she was deciding whether to trust him. He got the sense she'd already made that calculation somewhere between the range and the door. More like she was deciding where to start. Like the answer had a shape she needed to find the edge of before she could hand it to him. "To find out what I remember," she said. "About what?" "About him." Ethan held her gaze. Behind him, Rourke's radio attempts continued. Call signs, channel checks, the flat professional patience of someone who knows the line is dead but has to confirm it 3 more times before he can say so. "How old were you when you met Cross?" Ethan asked. Maya looked at the window. The blinking lights outside threw small colored shadows across her face in a pattern that kept shifting. 11, she said. He didn't push. He stood up, moved to the window, and looked out at the lot. Cross's vehicle was still there. Wherever Cross had gone inside the facility, he hadn't left. "Webb?" he said. Webb appeared in the doorway. "Yeah." "When did you last see Cross, CE?" Webb thought. 2240, maybe. He was in the tower when we ran the variable distance series. After that? He shook his head. Lost track. He's still in the building. You sure? Vehicle's in the lot. Webb processed this. He looked at Maya, then back at Ethan. His expression had moved past the skepticism of earlier in the night into something more careful. You want me to do a room by room? Not yet. Ethan turned back to the room. I want to finish the evaluation first. Maya looked up at him from the floor. Something crossed her face. Not gratitude, nothing that simple. More like recalibration. Like she'd expected a different answer and was adjusting her model of him accordingly. We're still running the evaluation, she said. That's what Cross ordered. Cross isn't here. He ordered it. I'm following it. He held her eyes. And I want to see what you can do. A pause. She stood up. Pause. They went back to the range at midnight. The temperature had dropped another 4 degrees. The wind had shifted, coming from the southwest now, which changed the problem entirely. The range was oriented north-south, and a southwest crosswind at this speed created a lateral push that the original target placements hadn't accounted for. Ethan mentioned this to no one. He wanted to see if she noticed. She noticed before she reached the firing line. He watched her step up to the staging table, pick up the M24, and then pause. She turned her head southwest, looked at the wind flags, looked at the target array. Her lips moved slightly. Not words, more like she was running numbers. The wind shifted, she said. About 20 minutes ago, Ethan said. What's the hold? He looked at her. What do you think? She studied the flags again. At 400, probably 4 to 5 inches right. At 250, 2.5. At 100, it's almost negligible, but not quite. She paused. Depends on the load. Federal match, 168 grain. Then 4 inches at 400, maybe 3.5. Ethan wrote it down without showing her what he'd written. The correct hold, calculated by the range operator before the wind shift, had been listed as 4 inches. She'd come in within half an inch on intuition and a 5-second look at the flags. He glanced at his team. They were arranged in a loose semicircle behind the firing line, ostensibly observing the evaluation, actually just watching her. The skepticism from earlier hadn't completely disappeared. Webb still had that particular set to his jaw that meant he was waiting for the other shoe to drop. But it had curdled into something more complicated. Uncomfortable, maybe. The feeling of watching someone do something you've dedicated years to learning and doing it with a confidence that suggests they didn't need as long as you did. "Ready when you are," Ethan said. She settled into the prone position. Her elbows found the surface without searching. The rifle came up against her shoulder and she made one small adjustment. Not the scope, the stock, micro-positioning her cheekbone against the comb. And then she was still. The wind spiked. 30 miles an hour, gusting, the flags going nearly horizontal. She waited. The gust dropped. There was a 3-second window in the lull. She used 2 of them. 4 rounds. The sequence was mechanical in its efficiency. No hesitation between shots, no adjustment pause, just the quiet rhythm of someone who had removed uncertainty from the process at some earlier point in their life and never let it back in. The last target dropped before the next gust hit. The range operator's voice came through the comm. 4 for 4. Headshots, all positions. Torres muttered something under his breath. It wasn't sarcastic this time. Ethan stepped forward. "We're moving to the variable conditions series." The variable conditions series was not in the standard candidate evaluation. It existed in a supplemental protocol that was reserved for candidates being assessed for advanced placement, sniper teams, specialized units, programs that Ethan had only partial knowledge of. It involved changes to the environment mid-sequence, target movement, lighting adjustment, shooter position changes, deliberate interference with the weapon system. It was designed to fail people. The pass rate was somewhere around 30% for operators who'd been shooting professionally for years. He hadn't told Maya they were running it. He watched her face when he changed the range configuration. Moving targets activated. The lighting rig shifting to a reduced illumination setting that cut the visible range by 40%, and a secondary rifle laid out on the table beside the M24. Different weapon, different caliber, different zero. The kind of change that was supposed to create a moment of uncertainty, a hesitation, a slight degradation in performance that the evaluator could measure and document. She looked at the secondary rifle. She looked at the lighting. She looked at the moving target track. 2 weapons, she said. It wasn't a question. "Sequence is your choice," Ethan said. "Do the moving targets correspond to any trigger condition, or are they independent?" Ethan paused. That was not a question most candidates asked. That was a question someone asked when they were thinking about the evaluation as a system rather than a sequence of tasks. "Independent," he said. She nodded. Picked up the M24, set it back down. Picked up the secondary rifle. A Remington 700 in .300 Win mag. Heavier, longer. A weapon designed for a different engagement envelope than the range they were standing on. She checked the bolt, checked the chamber, checked the scope adjustment. "What's the zero on this?" 250, Ethan said. She thought, did the math. "So at 400, I'm going to be about..." "Figure it out," he said. She looked at him. A beat. Then, "About 6 inches low at 400, which means I hold high." She said it the way someone says something that should be obvious. Not rudely, just factually. The way you talk when you've already moved past the question to the answer. She shot the static targets first with the Remington. 4 rounds, 4 hits, the holds compensated correctly. 2 of them slightly imperfect but within acceptable variance for a weapon she'd never held before tonight. Then she set the Remington down, picked up the M24, and ran the moving target sequence. The targets were mechanical. Simple lateral movement on a track, nothing sophisticated, but in reduced lighting at varied distances with a crosswind, they were genuinely difficult. She hit 7 of 8. The miss was her 3rd target. She broke her shot during a wind spike that nobody on the line had anticipated, half a second off her normal timing, and the round went wide. She didn't react to it. She didn't adjust her position or reset her breathing or do any of the things that shooters do when they've broken a shot badly and they know it. She simply chambered the next round and found the next target. When it was over, Ethan lowered his clipboard. He'd been writing scores for the last 40 minutes. He stopped writing and just looked at the range for a moment, at the targets with their impact marks, at the wind flags still snapping in the southwest breeze, at the floodlights in the darkness beyond them. "Candidate," he said. She lowered the M24 and looked at him. 7 out of 8 on the moving series with a weapon change mid-sequence and 40% reduced illumination. He paused. "In crosswind conditions." She waited. You missed the third target, he said. Wind spike, she said. I read it wrong. You read it wrong, he repeated. I thought it was going to drop. It didn't. He studied her. Most candidates don't acknowledge misses in a wind spike scenario. They usually attribute it to the wind. It was my read, she said. The wind did what wind does. I made a wrong call. A pause. That's mine. Carrera came up beside Ethan and stood there quietly for a moment. He looked at the target array. He looked at Maya. Then he looked at Ethan, and his expression said something that his mouth didn't. Webb, behind them, cleared his throat. Okay, he said. Nothing else, just okay. The single syllable carrying the weight of a recalibration. Torres walked to the staging table, stood next to Maya, and looked at the target array. He was quiet for a moment. Your father taught you this? Yes, she said. He military? A pause, small, specific. He was, she said. Torres nodded slowly. He didn't ask the next question. Either he heard the tense or he decided the answer was none of his business. He walked back to his position. Ethan wrote the final scores. He'd evaluated a lot of people at a lot of ranges in a lot of conditions. He'd seen talent, real talent, the kind that went beyond training into something more fundamental. He'd seen shooters who could do things that looked impossible until you understood the mechanics, and then they just looked difficult. He'd seen men who had mastered their fear of the shot to the point where the shot was pure reflex. He had never seen a 17-year-old girl shoot a variable condition series in crosswind and reduced illumination and come within one round of a perfect score. And more than the score, more than the accuracy. He'd never seen anyone shoot with that particular quality of quiet. Most people, even experienced operators, carried something into the shot. Anxiety, focus, the specific tension of wanting to do well. Maya carried nothing into the shot. Or rather, she carried something he couldn't name. Something that had burned off all the noise a long time ago and left only the mechanics. He thought about what she'd said to him. My father taught me when I was young. How young? Young. He capped his pen. Inside the operations room afterward, Rourke finally got through to the range operator on the secondary channel. The man had been in the equipment storage bay with a radio that had lost its charge. Simple explanation, but the way Rourke announced it, careful, checking Ethan's face as he said it, told Ethan that Rourke had already started thinking about things that simple explanations didn't cover. Cole. Carrera was at the operations terminal. He'd pulled something up, not the classified records, nothing that required Ethan's credentials, just the open access personnel directory. He tilted the screen. Look at this. Ethan looked. Cross's official biography. Standard issue. Service record summary, command positions, commendations, the kind of thing that appeared on official websites and in briefing documents and said everything and nothing at once. But Carrera had scrolled to the bottom, to the program affiliations section, and had highlighted something with his finger. A program designation. Veil 7. Ethan straightened up slowly. You recognize it, Carrera said. Not a question. I've seen the code before, Ethan said. I don't know what it is. I do, Carrera said. Partially. He leaned back. 6, 7 years ago, I was attached to a joint task force that ran into a Veil-designated operation in Eastern Europe. Nobody would tell us what it was. We were told to route around it. Don't ask, don't look, pretend you never saw the reference. What was the context? Asset management, Carrera said. That's what they called it. Asset management, specialized recruitment. He paused. The assets were young. The room was quiet except for the wind and the radio static. How young? Ethan asked. Carrera looked at the doorway that led to the corridor where Maya was. She'd gone to the bathroom 15 minutes ago and hadn't come back yet. That's what we were told not to ask, Carrera said. Ethan moved to the corridor. Maya was not in the bathroom. She was standing in the narrow corridor at the far end near the emergency exit door, looking at a bulletin board covered in facility notices and safety protocols. She turned when she heard his footsteps. The range operator's back on comm, Ethan said. I know, she said. I heard. He stopped a few feet from her. The corridor was narrow and the single fluorescent tube above them hummed with a frequency that got inside your teeth. He looked at her in the bad light, the dark circles under her eyes that he hadn't noticed at the range because the floodlights were too harsh for that kind of detail. The way her field clothing was too big. Not just because of fit, but because it looked like it had been issued to her recently, without the usual personalization that people give gear they've owned for a while. "You've been running," he said. She looked at him. "Before tonight?" he said. "You've been moving around. That's not your usual kit." A long pause. "I've been careful," she said. "About what?" She turned back to the bulletin board. One of the notices was a fire evacuation map. She appeared to be studying it, though he doubted that was what she was actually doing. "Cross has a way of finding people," she said. "He's done it before." "Who has he found before?" She didn't answer. "Maya." She turned. Something in her face had changed. Not broken open, not dramatic, just shifted. Like a door that's been kept closed for a long time has been opened a few inches, and you can feel the pressure difference without being able to see inside. "My father tried to get information out," she said, "about a program, Cross's program." She said it with the specific flatness of someone repeating a thing they've had to live with for so long it's lost its original horror and become just a fact, terrible and plain. He was careful, too. What happened to him? She looked at the fire evacuation map. "He disappeared," she said. "Officially, he died during a failed operation. Classified details can't be discussed. Very sorry for your loss." She paused. "I was 11. Ethan stood in the corridor and didn't say anything, because there wasn't anything to say that didn't feel obscenely inadequate, and he'd learned a long time ago that inadequate responses to real grief were worse than silence. "What's your real name?" he asked. She looked at him. A long moment. Outside, the wind ran against the building, and the Christmas lights on the tower threw faint colors through the narrow window at the end of the corridor. "Emma," she said. "Emma Vale." The name landed in the corridor like something physical. Ethan turned it over. Vale, V-A-L. The margin letters on the redacted file. "Your father's name," he said. "Daniel Vale," she said. "Captain, military intelligence." She paused. He worked for Cross for 3 years before he figured out what the program actually was. "What was it?" She looked at him steadily. "They took children," she said. "Gifted ones. The kind that score off the charts on aptitude assessments. The kind with fast processing and good spatial reasoning and the ability to suppress emotional interference under pressure." She said it carefully, like she'd had years to find the right words for it and still wasn't satisfied. They erased their identities, created new files, ran them through training programs that weren't documented through normal channels. A pause. They were building a specific type of asset, one that didn't exist on paper, one that couldn't be traced back to anything. And your father found out. "He found the records," she said. "He copied them. He was going to take them out." She stopped. "Cross found out first." Ethan stood very still. "And you," he said slowly. "You were in the program." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. He thought about the way she'd walked into the range, the way she'd adapted to every weapon change without complaint or visible adjustment period, the way she shot, not like someone trained, but like someone formed, built for it, the way a structure is built for load from the ground up. He thought about what Carrera had said. The assets were young. He thought about an 11-year-old girl watching her father disappear. "Cross brought you here," Ethan said. "Tonight. Christmas Eve, classified vehicle, personal escort. He didn't do that to evaluate you." "No," she said. "He did it to see what you remember." "To see if I'm still a threat," she said. "My father's evidence disappeared when he did, officially, but Cross has always known there was a possibility that some of it survived." She paused, "and that I might know where." Ethan looked at the exit door behind her. The emergency release bar, the sign above it in red. He looked at the corridor leading back toward the operations room, toward his team, toward the radio and the lit windows and the classified file with its blacked-out pages. "He's still in this building," Ethan said. "Yes," she said. And the two clicks on the radio earlier. Test signal, she said. Old protocol. Cross-verify authentication. Someone was confirming a position. Whose position? She looked at him. He understood. Hers. Someone in this building, or close to it, had used an operational signal to confirm that Maya Voss was inside Black Ridge, that she was located in a specific position, that she was contained within a known perimeter. And Cross was still here. And the range operator had been unreachable for 40 minutes. And the coyotes had stopped moving in the scrubland 2 hours ago. Ethan pulled his radio. He keyed it, started to speak, and stopped. Because if someone had been using the comm system to send position signals, then the comm system was not secure. He lowered the radio. He looked at Maya. She was watching him work through it. Not with urgency, not with the panic of someone who needed him to move faster. With patience. The particular patience of someone who had known the shape of the danger for a long time and was now waiting to see what the person next to them was going to do with the information. "How long have you known Cross was coming for you?" he asked. 3 weeks, she said. "When the evaluation invitation came through official channels, I knew." "Then why did you come?" She held his eyes for a long moment. The fluorescent tube hummed above them. Outside, the wind shifted direction again, and the Christmas lights on the tower blinked their irregular red and green against the desert dark. "Because this time," she said quietly, "I came prepared." She reached into the inner pocket of her field jacket and produced a small device, compact, sealed, matte black, the size of a large thumb drive but heavier. She held it in her palm for a moment, not offering it to him, just letting him see it. "What is that?" he asked. She closed her fingers around it. "The reason Cross needs me to not leave this facility," she said. The radio on Ethan's belt crackled. This time it wasn't 2 clicks. It was Webb's voice, tight and controlled in the way that meant he was keeping it tight deliberately. "Cole, you need to come to the north window, right now." Ethan looked at Maya. She had already put the device back in her jacket and was looking toward the operations room with an expression he was starting to recognize. The look of someone who has been waiting for a specific thing to happen and has just heard it begin. He moved toward the operations room. She followed him, and he noticed again the way she matched his pace without trying, and this time he understood it for what it was. She'd been moving in step with people who didn't know she was adapting to them for most of her life. Webb was at the north window, in the dark, looking through the glass with his NVG monocular raised to one eye. He lowered it when Ethan entered and handed it over without speaking. Ethan raised it to his eye and looked north. 3 figures, moving across the desert scrubland toward the facility perimeter. Tactical movement, bounding overwatch, 2 moving while 1 held position, then rotating. Not random, not lost, deliberate. Closing distance with the specific patience of people who knew exactly where they were going and were not in a hurry because they didn't believe anyone inside knew they were coming. Professional, armed. Ethan lowered the monocular. His team was looking at him. 6 operators, all of them reading the same thing he was reading. Behind him, Maya stood at the edge of the room, and he turned to look at her, and she was already looking at the north window with the expression of someone who had known about the 3 figures before he had. "Tell me," he said. "Cross's insurance," she said. "In case the evaluation didn't work." "Didn't work how?" She looked at him. "In case you didn't find a reason to keep me here," she said. "They were going to create one." The room was quiet for 3 seconds. Then Carrera said, very quietly, "We've got a problem." "Yeah," Ethan said. "No," Carrera said. He was looking at his terminal screen. He'd pulled up the facility security camera feed. Internal cameras, 3 of them, covering the main corridor, the equipment bay, and the entrance hall. He turned the screen so Ethan could see it. The entrance hall camera was showing the lobby. Colonel Adrian Cross was standing in the lobby. He was on a phone. And he was looking directly at the camera with the expression of a man who knows he's being watched and has decided it no longer matters. Cross didn't move when Ethan walked into the lobby. He finished whatever he was saying into the phone, low, unhurried, the voice of a man wrapping up a logistical detail rather than standing in a facility he'd just used as a trap, and ended the call. He slid the phone into his jacket pocket and looked at Ethan with the particular composure of someone who has spent decades in rooms where other people are afraid and has stopped noticing what that looks like. "Sergeant Cole," he said. "Sir." Ethan kept his hands loose at his sides. "We have a security contact. 3 armed individuals moving on the north perimeter. I need to know if you have information about that." Cross looked at him for a moment. Not long, 2 seconds, maybe 3, long enough to communicate that he was deciding something and that the decision wasn't difficult. "Joint training element," Cross said. "Night navigation exercise. They're authorized. They're moving in tactical bounds toward this facility." "Night navigation," Cross said again. Patient, final. The tone of a man who has repeated a lie so many times it has become, for him, a kind of truth. Ethan held his eyes. "Sir, I'm going to need that authorization in writing before I stand my team down." A pause. "You're going to need authorization," Cross said slowly, like he was tasting the words. "From me?" "Yes, sir." Cross looked past him toward the corridor, looking for something, or confirming the location of something. His eyes came back to Ethan. "The candidate," he said. "Where is she?" "Operations room," Ethan said. "Under observation." "Good." Cross straightened his jacket. "Keep her there. The exercise element will pass the perimeter and continue north. It'll be done within the hour. And the written authorization will be provided before you leave this facility." Cross moved toward the corridor. "Continue the evaluation." He walked past Ethan without another word. Ethan stood in the lobby for 3 seconds after Cross's footsteps faded. The entrance hall was cold. The exterior door hadn't sealed properly after Cross had apparently been in and out, and desert air was pushing through the gap at the bottom, carrying sand and the smell of alkali soil. He went back to the operations room. Kabat. Maya was at the far wall where he'd left her, but she wasn't standing anymore. She was crouched over the floor near the equipment locker, doing something with her bootlace that took about 2 seconds longer than bootlaces normally take. When she stood up, her expression was neutral. He looked at her boot, then at her face. "What did he say?" she asked. "Joint training element, night navigation exercise." She looked at him steadily. "And you believe that?" "I didn't say I believed it." He moved to the north window and raised the NVG monocular again. The 3 figures had closed distance. They were at the perimeter fence now, at the edge of the floodlight range, still in shadow, not crossing, waiting for something. He lowered the monocular and turned to his team. They were all in the room now. Webb had pulled Haskell in from the corridor, and the 6 of them were arranged in a loose configuration that was not quite a tactical formation but was moving in that direction. They were all armed. They'd been armed since he called stand to. But there was a difference between being armed and being ready to use it, and the space between those 2 states was filled with things like authorization and clarity about threat status and the specific difficulty of pointing a weapon at something your commanding officer has just described as a training exercise. "Talk to me," Ethan said to the room. Webb crossed his arms. "Those 3 aren't doing a navigation exercise." "How do you know?" "Because people doing a navigation exercise don't hold position at a perimeter fence and wait," Webb said. "They cross it or they move around it. Those 3 have been stationary for 8 minutes. "Could be a checkpoint," Torres said, not defending the explanation, just noting it. "Could be," Webb said, "but the way they came in, bounding overwatch, 1 always stationary while 2 move, that's not a navigation exercise. That's a deliberate approach on a fixed position." Ethan looked at Carrera. Carrera shook his head slightly. He didn't have anything to add that the room didn't already know. Ethan looked at Maya. She was watching the exchange with that quality of attention she had, absorbing everything without appearing to absorb it, her face arranged in the neutral expression she wore the way other people wore armor. "You said Cross has insurance," Ethan said. "You said they were there in case the evaluation didn't work. Define didn't work." She looked at him. "In case you didn't find a reason to isolate me." "To isolate you from who?" "From a functioning comm system. From people who might ask the wrong questions." She paused. "From the ability to transmit anything to anyone outside this facility." Rourke looked up from the radio console. You think they're here to cut comms? Among other things, Maya said. The primary comm line went down 40 minutes ago, Rourke said. He said it slowly, like he was hearing the information for the first time, even though he'd known it for 40 minutes. I've been on the backup channel. If the backup goes, it won't just go, Maya said. Someone will take it. The room absorbed this. Ethan moved to the terminal. He pulled up the external comms status display. A simple dashboard, green lights for active channels, red for inactive. Primary was red. He already knew that. Secondary was green. Emergency satellite was... He looked at the screen. Emergency satellite was yellow. Degraded signal. Not down, not fully up. The kind of reading you got when something was interfering with the uplink hardware, physically, on the roof or the exterior mounting array. Someone's been working on our SAT antenna, he said. Nobody said anything. He thought about Cross standing in the lobby, calm, unhurried, just finishing a call. He thought about the window of time between when Cross had disappeared from the tower and when Ethan had finally located him in the lobby. 90 minutes, roughly. 90 minutes in a facility this size, with access to maintenance corridors and equipment rooms and the exterior service ladder that ran up the north face to the roof. He turned to Maya. How long have they been working on the antenna? Probably since Cross arrived, she said. He wouldn't wait until he needed it. He'd want the asset in place before the evaluation started. Asset, Ethan repeated. That's what he calls them, she said. People who perform functions, not individuals. Is that what he called you? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Ethan pulled Webb and Carrera into the side corridor. He kept his voice low and fast. I need you two to separate assessments. Webb, you're looking at those three on the perimeter. Tell me if they move. Tell me when. Tell me direction. Carrera, I need you in the equipment bay. The SAT antenna access panel is on the interior wall, north side. Don't go outside. Just check the interior diagnostics and tell me what you find. Webb nodded. Carrera was already moving. And the girl? Webb said. Ethan thought. She stays in the ops room, Torres and Rourke on her. On her or with her? The distinction was real and Webb knew it. Ethan thought about it honestly for 2 seconds. With her, he said. She's not the problem. Webb looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone calibrating how much to say. He settled on, You're sure about that? I'm sure about her, Ethan said. I'm not sure about anything else. Webb nodded and went back toward the north window. Ethan returned to the operations room. Torres and Rourke were there. Maya was standing at the window, not looking at the perimeter, looking at the tower, at the blinking Christmas lights, at whatever was visible from that angle of the night. They're going to come in, she said, without turning. Not through the fence, they'll find a softer approach. There's a drainage culvert on the east side. It runs under the perimeter and exits near the equipment bay. Ethan stopped walking. How do you know about the culvert? I looked at the facility schematic when Cross's vehicle was being logged in at the gate, she said. It was on the wall in the entry processing room. Maintenance layout. He stared at her. You memorized the facility schematic in the time it took to process entry. She turned from the window. I memorized the relevant parts, she said. The culvert is relevant. Torres was looking at her with an expression that had moved past professional wariness into something else. Not quite awe. The specific discomfort of a highly competent person who has just realized they're standing next to someone operating on a different level entirely, and they're not sure how to hold that fact yet. Ethan keyed his radio on the secondary channel. Carrera. Yeah. Carrera's voice was tight. You're going to want to hear this. Talk. Interior diagnostic on the SAT system is showing a manual bypass on the signal amplifier. Someone plugged a signal attenuator into the hardware chain. It's a passive device, no footprint, degrades the uplink without killing it completely. Clean work. A pause. Recent. The heat signature on the connector is still warm. Cross. On the roof or in the maintenance space, sometime in the last 2 hours. Can you clear it? Ethan asked. Takes about 4 minutes. I need to pull the access panel and physically remove the device. Do it. Copy. Ethan looked at Maya. She was watching him with that expression again, the patient recalibration of someone adjusting their model of an ongoing situation. If they're monitoring our secondary channel, she said, they just heard that. He hadn't thought about that. He should have thought about that. Would Cross be monitoring our comm? He asked. He'd have planned for everything he could plan for, she said. Comm intercept is basic. Ethan looked at Rourke. Is there a hardline option in this facility? Not radio. Rourke thought. Operations room has a landline, runs through the range management system, separate infrastructure from the radio. It's old. This facility hasn't been updated in years. Is it functional? I don't know. I've never used it. Find out. Rourke moved to the far corner of the operations room where an institutional beige telephone sat on a desk that appeared to have been there since the facility was built. He picked it up. He listened. Dial tone, he said, sounding almost surprised. Get me SOCOM duty officer, Ethan said. Now. Rourke started dialing. Cross came back into the operations room 4 minutes later. He came in through the main corridor entrance, unhurried, jacket still neat, the expression of a man checking on a subordinate operation that he expected to find in order. He looked at Ethan first, then at Maya, then at the telephone that Rourke was speaking quietly into in the corner. His face didn't change, but something changed behind his face. It was subtle, a micro-tightening around the eyes, a slight adjustment in the set of his jaw, the recalibration of someone who has encountered an element outside their planning parameters and is running fast calculations about what it means. Sergeant Cole, he said, what's the status of the evaluation? Evaluation is complete, sir, Ethan said. We're running post-assessment comms. Cross looked at the phone. That line is for facility administration. Yes, sir. It's not for operational communications. No, sir. We're using it for logistics. A pause. Our satellite link is degraded. We're having trouble reaching our duty station. Cross looked at him for 3 seconds. I'll have my comms officer look at your satellite system. Stand that line down. Ethan didn't move. That's an order, Sergeant. With respect, sir, I have a standing duty requirement to maintain comm contact with my unit chain of command during any extended field assignment. The landline is the only reliable link we currently have. Cross took 1 step forward. He was taller than Ethan by 2 inches and had the kind of physical composure that accumulates when people have done what you've told them to do for 30 years. The step was not aggressive. It was a demonstration of proximity, of spatial authority, of the quiet physics of rank. Stand it down, Cross said. Ethan held his ground. In the corner, Rourke had gone quiet. Whether he'd connected to the duty officer or was simply holding the line, Ethan couldn't tell without looking, and he didn't look away from Cross. Sir, Ethan said, I'm going to need to resolve the perimeter security situation before I can stand down any comms. The perimeter situation is resolved. I told you. The 3 individuals on the north perimeter are still in position, sir, stationary at the fence line for the last 22 minutes. That's not consistent with a navigation exercise. A silence. Cross and Ethan looked at each other across 6 feet of operations room floor, and the silence between them had the quality of something that had been building for the last 3 hours and was now visible in the open, unmistakable in its shape. Maya moved. Not toward Ethan, not toward Cross. She moved to the window, the north window, and stood with her back to the room, looking out. Her right hand went to her field jacket pocket, came back empty. She was checking that the device was still there. Cross tracked the movement. His eyes went to her jacket pocket, back to her face. Something happened in his expression. A small, quick thing, there and gone, like a card flipped face up for a single frame and then turned back over. He looked at Ethan again. There's something I should tell you, Cross said. His voice had changed, not dramatically, but the layer of command patience had thinned, and beneath it was something cooler, more direct. The voice of a man who has decided that the softer approach has run out of runway. That girl, Cross said, is not a candidate. Ethan waited. She's a security concern, Cross said. She has access to classified material that was illegally removed from a protected program. She's been in contact with individuals who are using her to destabilize an active operation. He paused. I brought her here under controlled conditions to manage the situation safely. What I need from you is very simple. I need you to step back and let me do that." The room was quiet. Torres was by the equipment locker, completely still. Rourke had set the phone down on the desk without hanging it up. Haskell was at the door with his arms at his sides and his face arranged in the careful blankness of someone waiting to understand which direction this goes before they choose one. Ethan looked at Cross. He looked at Maya's back, at the north window, at the desert dark beyond the glass. "Sir," he said, "with respect, that's not how this works." Cross looked at him. "You brought a 17-year-old civilian to this facility without providing adequate documentation, and the security contact on our perimeter arrived after you made a phone call in our lobby. I'm not going to stand my team down based on your verbal account of the situation. That's not a personal judgment. That's protocol." "Protocol," Cross said. "Yes, sir." Cross looked at him for a long moment. Then something shifted in his posture. A subtle release, the way a held breath finally moves. Not defeat, something colder than defeat, the decision to stop pretending. "She's told you things," Cross said. It wasn't a question. Ethan didn't answer. "Whatever she's told you, understand that you have a partial picture." Cross's voice was level, measured, the voice of a man who has worked with partial pictures his whole career and knows how to use the gaps. That program existed for a reason. The assets in it were not harmed. They were protected, trained, given capabilities they would never have developed otherwise. Her father, he stopped, chose his words. Her father made choices that created risks he didn't disclose. I managed those risks. "You managed them," Ethan said. "Yes." "By doing what?" A pause. "By containing the exposure," Cross said. "Daniel Vale," Ethan said. Cross's face didn't move, but the stillness became absolute. The complete absence of motion that happens when someone is working very hard to produce it. "You've been digging in her file," Cross said. There was a name visible in the margin. "That file is classified above your clearance." "I saw 3 letters," Ethan said. "VAL. You just gave me the rest." The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. It had weight. It had the specific gravity of something that can't be taken back. A name that's been confirmed, an implication that's been made solid. Maya turned from the window. She turned slowly, and when she faced the room, the expression on her face was something Ethan hadn't seen from her yet. Not the control, not the patience, not the careful neutrality she'd worn since she walked through the door. What he saw now was something that had been held down for a very long time, with a very specific kind of effort, and it was still held down. She wasn't going to collapse, wasn't going to break open in front of a room full of people she'd known for 4 hours. But the holding down was visible now, and that was different. She looked at Cross. Cross looked at her. Whatever was between them in that moment had nothing to do with rank or programs or classified files. It was older than that, more fundamental. 6 years, she said. Cross didn't answer. 6 years I've been moving, she said. Different cities, different names, waiting for you to send someone. Her voice was level, factual, only slightly rougher than usual. And you sent yourself. Maya, Cross started. Emma, she said. My name is Emma Vale. Cross closed his mouth. My father's name was Daniel Vale. He was a captain in military intelligence, and he worked for your program for 3 years because he believed it was legitimate, and when he found out it wasn't, he tried to do the right thing. She paused. And you made sure he never got the chance. You don't know what happened. I was 11, not blind. Her voice cracked on the last word. Not broken, just the fracture that appears in even the most controlled voice when the thing being said has been carried alone long enough. She absorbed it and continued. I know what happened. I saw the last transmission he sent before he disappeared. I know the authorization codes. I know the dates. I know which assets were in the program and what their original identities were. She held his gaze. I know everything he knew because he made sure of it. The room was absolutely still. Ethan looked at Cross's face and watched a man do the calculation. The fast, unsentimental arithmetic of someone adding up what has been said against what can be contained, measuring the gap, evaluating the options. He watched the calculation finish. He watched Cross's hand move toward his jacket. "Weapon," Webb's voice sharp from the doorway. He'd come in from the corridor without anyone noticing, and his sidearm was up and aimed at Cross before Ethan had fully processed what was happening. Cross stopped. His hand was at his jacket pocket. His phone was in that pocket. So was, Ethan realized, something else, something that had made Webb move that fast. "Hands," Webb said. Cross raised his hands slowly, with the dignified deliberateness of a man who is furious and is managing it by making every movement a statement. In his right hand, half clear of the jacket pocket, was a secondary radio, small, tactical, the kind of compact encrypted unit that operated on a frequency outside the facility's standard comm infrastructure, a transmitter. Ethan moved forward and took it. He turned it over. The transmission light was red, active, broadcasting. He looked at Cross. "Who's listening?" Cross said nothing. "The three on the perimeter," Ethan said. "They heard everything." Cross looked at him with an expression that was finally stripped of its layers. Not angry, not cold, just very, very tired. The specific exhaustion of a man who has held something together for a long time and has just watched it begin to come apart in a room he chose and could not control. Webb's radio crackled. Carrere's voice from the equipment bay fast and tight. "Cole, the culvert, east side. I've got movement." Ethan's hand went to his weapon. Maya crossed the room in 3 strides and stopped at the equipment locker. She looked at Ethan. Her face was back to the neutral operational expression, the emotion folded back down and put away with a speed that said she'd had a lot of practice. "You have a Barrett in that locker," she said. "I saw it when Torres opened it earlier." Ethan looked at her. 900 meters to the east perimeter from the range tower, she said. "The culvert exit is visible from the tower at that angle. If they're coming through the culvert, they'll cross exposed ground for roughly 40 meters before they reach cover." Torres was already at the locker. "You want me to shoot?" she said. Not a question, not a request. A statement, laid flat, letting him make the choice. Ethan looked at her for 1 second. Everything she'd told him tonight, everything he'd seen on that range, everything that Cross's face had confirmed in the last 5 minutes. It ran through him fast, the way information moves when the moment doesn't allow for careful deliberation. He looked at Torres. "Open it," he said. Torres pulled the locker open. The Barrett M107 was racked inside, cleaned and cased. Maya had it out before Torres stepped back. She worked efficiently. Case open, weapon check, bolt function, scope. Her hands moved like she'd done this in the dark, and maybe she had. "Ammunition," she said. Torres handed her a box. She loaded the magazine with the specific fast patience of someone who has trained the panic out of the process. "Tower access," she said. "Corridor, left, stairs at the end," Ethan said. She moved. Ethan turned to Webb. "You have Cross. He doesn't make a call, doesn't move, doesn't breathe wrong." "Copy," Webb said. His weapon was still up. His eyes were on Cross. Cross looked at Ethan with an expression that had, somewhere in the last 30 seconds, become something else entirely. Not defeat. Not rage. The look of a man who has just understood that the variable he spent 6 years trying to eliminate has, in fact, been the one controlling the shape of this night from the beginning. "She planned this," Cross said. "I know," Ethan said. "You're going to regret—" "Maybe," Ethan said, "but not tonight." He went toward the stairs. Chet. The tower was cold and loud. The wind hit the observation platform from 3 directions, and the Christmas lights strung along the railing snapped and rattled with each gust. Ethan reached the top of the stairs and pushed through the access door, and the desert opened up around him. 400 meters of lit range to the south, darkness in every other direction, the stars gone behind cloud cover that had moved in from the west while they'd been inside. Maya was already at the north railing with the Barrett set up on the bipod. The barrel resting between 2 railing posts, her body settled into the platform floor like she'd been there for hours. "I need eyes," she said. Ethan raised the NVG monocular, looked east. The culvert exit was a dark depression in the ground, roughly 200 meters beyond the perimeter fence. He couldn't see movement yet, but Carrera's call had been confident, and Carrera didn't make unconfident calls. "Nothing yet," he said. "They'll hesitate at the exit," she said. "Confirm the receiver is down before they move. Give me 4 seconds of stationary before I take the shot." "These might be—" He stopped. "What?" "We don't know who they are." "We know what they're doing," she said. "That's not the same thing as authorization to—" "Sergeant Cole," her voice was quiet and precise. "Those 3 people are here to make sure I do not leave this facility. That's not a training exercise and it's not a navigation problem. You know that." He looked through the monocular. Still nothing at the culvert. The radio on his belt, Rourke's voice from the operations room, pitched high and fast. "Cole, we have movement on the west camera. Someone outside the west wall, moving toward the entrance. This is not the perimeter 3. This is a 4th contact. 4, not 3. Cross had 4. Ethan processed this in a fraction of a second. The geometry of 4 contacts, the team distribution, Webb holding cross, Carrera in the equipment bay, Torres and Rourke in the operations room, Haskell unaccounted for in the last 2 minutes. "Tower," Maya said, very quietly. "What?" "Someone's at the base of the tower." He heard it then. Footsteps on the exterior stairs, not the interior stairs he'd come up, the exterior maintenance staircase on the south face. Not running, careful, deliberate, the specific pacing of someone who wants to arrive without announcing it. Ethan drew his sidearm. He moved to the south edge of the platform. The exterior stair access was a steel door set in the platform railing, padlocked from the outside during normal operations. The padlock was gone. The door was open 2 inches, moving slightly in the wind. He put his back to the wall beside it. 1 breath. He kicked the door open. The figure on the stairs was 2 steps from the top. Male, medium build, tactical clothing, weapon coming up. Ethan was faster. He had the sidearm on the man's center mass before the man's weapon cleared his holster. "Don't," Ethan said. The man froze. Private contractor, no unit markings. The weapon was commercial, good quality, suppressed, the kind of equipment that didn't come from a military supply chain. "Weapon down," Ethan said. On the stairs, now." The man complied. Slow, watching Ethan with the professional assessment of someone calculating odds and not liking them. From the north railing, without turning, "Cole. 1 second. Cole, I have the culvert exit. 2 contacts, moving." He looked at the contractor on the stairs. He looked back at Maya. He made a decision that he would examine for years afterward, turning it over in different lights, checking it for the place where he might have chosen differently. "Take the shot," he said. 1 second of silence. The Barrett fired twice. The sound was enormous on the open platform. A physical pressure that hit Ethan in the chest and rattled the Christmas lights along the railing and sent the contractor on the stairs flinching backward into the rail hard enough to make the whole staircase shudder. From the east, nothing moved. From below, Carrera's voice on the radio, clipped and certain. 2 contacts down at the culvert exit, neither moving. Ethan looked at the contractor on the stairs. The man was looking past him at the north railing where Maya had not moved. Still prone, still on the weapon, one eye at the scope with the particular stillness of someone who is fired and is confirming results. "The 3rd one on the perimeter," Ethan said without taking his eyes off the contractor. "Your partner, where is he?" The contractor said nothing. "Where is he?" Ethan said again. Still nothing. Ethan looked at Maya. She had shifted the weapon, barely, a few degrees, and he realized she had already moved the scope to cover the 3rd perimeter contact. She'd done it in the seconds between the 2 shots and the question. "West fence," she said quietly. "He's running." Running, away from the facility back into the desert, abandoning the operation. The operation was over. Ethan looked at the contractor on the stairs. He looked at the Barrett casing rolling slowly across the platform deck in the wind. He looked at the Christmas lights blinking their senseless red and green against the black desert sky. He thought about a man named Daniel Vale who had tried to do the right thing and disappeared. He thought about an 11-year-old girl who had been carrying that fact ever since. He keyed his radio. "Rourke, Get me that landline again. I need the SOCOM duty officer, and I need the Inspector General's office. Both. Tonight. Copy, Rourke said. He looked at Maya. She had lowered the Barrett and was sitting on the platform floor with her back against the railing, the weapon across her knees, looking up at the cloud-covered sky with an expression that was very tired and very young, and not trying to be either of those things. She had the device in her hand, the compact black unit from her jacket pocket. She was holding it the way you hold something you've been carrying for a long time and have finally gotten close enough to a destination to start believing you might actually arrive. 2 of Cross's people are down, Ethan said. He said it plainly, letting the weight of it land. I need to understand exactly what we just did and why. She looked up at him. My father's evidence is on this device, she said. Encrypted, time-stamped, authenticated with his digital signature. She turned it once in her fingers. He recorded everything. Names, dates, transmission logs, asset files, authorization chains. She paused. Everything Cross needed to disappear to keep the program running. Ethan crouched down so he was at her level. And you've had this the whole time. Since I was 12, she said. He left it with me the night before he went missing, told me to keep it safe until I found someone worth giving it to. The wind pushed at them. The lights blinked. It took you 6 years to find someone, Ethan said. She looked at him. Something moved in her face. Not a smile, but the shadow of one. Brief. The kind that appears when something that has been unfunny for a very long time finally touches something human. I wasn't looking for someone to give it to, she said. I was looking for someone who would know what to do with it. Below them, in the operations room, Webb's voice came through the radio. Cole, Cross is asking to make a call. Ethan straightened up. He looked at the tower door, at the contractor still sitting on the exterior staircase with his hands visible and his options gone, at the dark desert where 2 men were down and a third was running and a fourth was somewhere against the west wall thinking about his next move. He keyed the radio. Tell Cross he can make all the calls he wants, Ethan said. In about 40 minutes, it won't matter who picks up. He looked at Maya. She had closed her fingers around the device again, holding it tight, and was looking east toward the culvert and the dark and the long flat distance of desert that stretched out toward a horizon that was just beginning, barely, to show the first gray suggestion of a dawn that was still an hour away. The contractor on the exterior stairs gave his name as Briggs. No first name offered, none requested. He sat with his back against the railing and his hands zip-tied in front of him, and looked at the platform floor with the specific expression of a man running calculations about legal exposure and arriving at unpleasant numbers. Ethan left Haskell with him and went back inside. The tower stairs were narrow and his boots were loud on the metal, and he was aware, descending, of how tired he was. Not the soft tiredness of a missed night's sleep, but the specific depletion that accumulated when your body had been running threat assessment chemistry for several hours without resolution. His hands were steady. They were always steady. But behind his sternum there was a low, persistent vibration that he recognized as the aftermath of a decision that couldn't be unmade. 2 men were down in the desert east of the perimeter fence. He didn't know their names. He didn't know if they were alive. He knew what they'd been sent to do, and he knew what Maya had done, and he knew that the authorization chain for all of it was tangled in a way that was going to take people with more rank and more clearance than him a long time to straighten out. He reached the operations room and stopped in the doorway. Cross was seated at the table. Not restrained, Webb had made a judgment call, which Ethan would have made the same way, that a colonel in zip ties before formal charges were filed created a different set of problems than a colonel sitting at a table with a SEAL standing 4 feet away. Cross's hands were flat on the table in front of him. He was looking at nothing in particular. His composure was still intact, technically, but it had the quality of something held together by habit rather than confidence. The composure of a man who has run out of moves and is waiting for the board to confirm it. Rourke was on the landline in the corner, speaking quietly and taking notes. He looked up when Ethan entered, covered the receiver with his palm. Duty officer is awake. IG office is slower. I've got a night desk clerk who's trying to locate a senior officer. Keep going, Ethan said. Torres was at the window. Carrera had come in from the equipment bay. His jacket was dusty, and he had a small laceration on his left forearm that he'd wrapped in a field dressing without mentioning it. He caught Ethan's eye and shook his head slightly. Minor. Don't worry about it. Ethan nodded. Maya came down the tower stairs 30 seconds after Ethan. She had unloaded the Barrett and left it in the tower, so proper procedure, though the situation was well past the point where procedure was the organizing principle. She came into the operations room and stopped. She looked at Cross sitting at the table. Cross looked at her. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Cross said, "Sit down, Emma." She didn't sit. "Don't call me that." "It's your name." "You don't get to use it," she said. Flat, certain, the way you say something that you decided a long time ago. Cross looked at his hands on the table. He turned them over once, palms up, then back down, a gesture that might have meant something or nothing. "How long have you been planning tonight?" She looked at him. "Since you sent the evaluation invitation?" 3 weeks, he said. "Yes." "And before that?" A pause. "Longer." Cross nodded slowly, like this confirmed something he'd already known. "Your father would have been—" He stopped, started again. "Daniel was thorough. Whatever he gave you, he would have given you everything you needed to use it." "He did," she said. "And you waited." "I waited until I had somewhere to send it where you couldn't intercept it first." She glanced at Rourke on the phone. "A facility with a landline that runs on separate infrastructure. A team with enough rank to hold you while the calls went through." She paused. "And an evaluation request that gave me legitimate, documented reason to be here, in this building, under your own authorization signature." The room was quiet. Carrera made a sound, not quite a laugh. The sound of someone who has just understood the architecture of something and is simultaneously impressed and unsettled by it. "You used the invitation," Ethan said. "Cross needed me here," she said. "I needed to be here. We had the same destination and different reasons. That's the simplest kind of plan." Webb, near the door, crossed his arms. He was looking at Maya with an expression that had traveled a long distance since the beginning of the night, from dismissal to doubt to reluctant respect to something that was currently located somewhere past respect and hadn't found its label yet. "How old were you when you started planning this?" he asked. She looked at him. 13, she said. "Roughly." Webb looked at the floor, then at the ceiling, then at Ethan, as if Ethan might have something useful to offer. Ethan didn't. The SOCOM duty officer called back on the landline at 0147. His name was Major Dwight Ferris, and he was audibly not pleased about being on a night desk call that had escalated from a routine security incident report to something that required him to locate his supervisor's supervisor at 2 in the morning on Christmas Day. Ethan could hear it in the clipped economy of his questions. Not hostility, just the tight efficiency of someone compressing what should be a long conversation into the shortest possible version because other calls were already stacking up. Ethan gave him the summary. Clean, sequential, the facts in the order they happened without editorial. He used the word contractor for the 3 individuals on the perimeter and the one on the tower stairs. He used the phrase potential evidence of unauthorized program activity for the device in Maya's jacket. He used security response for what Maya had done with the Barrett, because that was accurate, and because the alternative phrasings were accurate in ways that would generate different kinds of paperwork. Ferris listened. He asked 3 clarifying questions. He said, "Hold the scene. Do not release Colonel Cross. Do not allow any communications from Colonel Cross to external parties until a senior officer arrives on site. ETA, approximately 90 minutes. "Copy," Ethan said. "We have a contractor in custody and 2 individuals down at the east perimeter. I need medical." "Medical is already being dispatched with the response team," Ferris said. "Are the 2 at the perimeter?" Ethan started. "I don't have a status on them," Ferris said. "Hold the scene." He hung up. Ethan set the phone down and stood in the corner of the operations room for a moment with his hand still on the receiver. He was thinking about 2 men in the desert east of the fence who might be alive and might not be, and about a 17-year-old girl who had fired a .50 caliber weapon at them from 900 meters in the dark and crosswind and hadn't missed. He thought about what she'd said at the range, hours ago that felt like days. "My father taught me when I was young." He went back to the main table. Cross was still seated. Maya had taken a position near the wall, standing, arms crossed, watching Cross the way you watch something that you've been watching for a long time and are not going to stop watching now. There's a response team inbound, Ethan told Cross. 90 minutes. Cross received this with a single nod. Is there anything you want to say before they arrive? Ethan asked. He meant it genuinely. Not as a taunt, not as a procedural formality, as a real question. He'd spent enough time around men in Cross's position to know that sometimes, when the walls came in, they said things that mattered. Cross looked at him. He looked at Maya. He looked at his hands. The program worked, he said back. That's what nobody wants to hear. The program worked. The assets it produced were exceptional, operationally effective in ways that conventional training couldn't replicate. He paused. What Daniel found in those files, he read it as an atrocity. He wasn't wrong about the mechanics, but he was wrong about the outcome. The outcome, Maya said from the wall. Her voice was very quiet. The assets are alive, Cross said. Trained, capable. Some of them are doing work right now that... I'm not an asset, she said. Cross looked at her. I'm a person, she said. My name is Emma Vale. My father was Daniel Vale. We lived in a house in Maryland with a yellow door and a dog named Tucker, and my father made pancakes on Sunday mornings and taught me to shoot at a range outside Annapolis because he said the most important thing he could give me was the ability to protect myself. Her voice was still level, still factual, but it cost her something. Ethan could see it in the slight tension across her jaw, the extra care of each word. And then your program took all of that and replaced it with a file number and a cover identity and 6 years of running, and you're sitting here telling me the outcome was good. Cross said nothing. What happened to the others? She said. The other children in the program. Where are they now? A silence. Some of them were successfully transitioned into operational roles, Cross said. Some were... Where are they now? She said again. Not louder, just more certain. Cross looked at his hands. That was its own answer. Ethan looked at Carrera. Carrera's face was doing something he'd never seen on it before. Carrera, who had been in combat in 4 countries and had the specific emotional weatherproofing that came with that, his face doing something open and unguarded that he'd normally never allow in a room with other people. Torres had walked to the window and was looking out at the desert. His back was to the room. He'd been standing that way for several minutes. Webb said, to nobody in particular, How many kids? Cross didn't answer. Sir. Webb's voice was not aggressive, not performatively calm, just direct. How many children were in the program? A long pause. Over the full operational period, Cross said, approximately 31 individuals were processed through the primary pipeline. The number sat in the room, 31. Webb looked at the table. He picked up a pen that was sitting on the evaluation clipboard and set it back down. He did this twice. It was the kind of small, displaced action that happened when a person needed to do something with their hands to keep from doing something with their face. Processed, Rourke said from the corner. He hadn't meant to say it out loud. It came out as a breath more than a word. At 0223, the IG officer called back. Her name was Colonel Patricia Hahn, and she was wide awake in a way that suggested she had been awake before the call, which meant someone above Ferris had already been in contact with someone above her, and the conversation Ethan was having wasn't the most senior version of itself currently in progress. She asked more questions than Ferris had, and they were sharper. Specific questions about authorization documentation, about Cross's stated operational justification, about the physical evidence currently in the possession of the candidate. The device, she said. Who has it? The candidate, Ethan said. Has it been accessed? Not in my presence. Is it encrypted? She says yes. I need that device held intact and unaccessed until our technical team arrives. Nobody opens it, nobody copies it, nobody attempts to bypass the encryption. Is that clear? Yes, ma'am. And the candidate, she's a minor? 17, ma'am. A pause on the line, not a surprised pause. A pause that meant something was being added to a mental list. Has she been medically assessed? Ethan looked at Maya across the room. She was sitting now, finally, in a chair near the wall, and the exhaustion was visible on her in a way it hadn't been 2 hours ago. Not weak, just present. the tiredness of someone who had been running on a specific kind of fuel for a long time and was finally in a place where they didn't have to burn it. Not formally, he said. That happens when we arrive, Han said. She's a minor in a military facility under unusual circumstances. Make sure she has water, make sure she's warm, and make sure no one questions her further until I have a JAG officer on site. Copy, ma'am. Cole. Her voice changed slightly. Not softer, but different, more direct. What's your read on the situation? He thought about the question. He thought about how to answer it accurately in the fewest words. Ma'am, he said, I think a 17-year-old girl walked into this facility tonight knowing that the man who arranged her invitation was planning to ensure she didn't leave. I think she walked in anyway because she was carrying evidence that she needed to get to someone who could do something with it. And I think she was right about all of it. A pause. That's your read, Han said. Yes, ma'am. All right, she said, and then, good work, Sergeant. She hung up. Ethan set the phone down. He crossed the room to Maya's chair and crouched in front of her, at her level, the way he'd done in the corridor hours ago. She looked at him. Her eyes were tired, 17 years old and tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. Medical is coming with the response team, he said. JAG officer, too. Nobody's going to question you further tonight. She nodded. Are you hurt? No. Are you? He started to say fine, stopped, because it was the wrong word, and he knew it. Is there anything you need right now? She looked at her hands in her lap. The device was in her jacket pocket. She touched it briefly through the fabric, not checking it was there, just touching it. The way you touch something you've been carrying so long, the weight of it has become part of your weight. I need to know about the two at the culvert, she said. He'd been expecting a different answer. He wasn't sure what. But the specific question surprised him. The directness of it, the willingness to ask. We don't have status yet, he said. She nodded. She looked at the window, the east-facing window, in the direction of the culvert. I didn't want to, she said. Not quietly, not dramatically, just factually, the way she said most things. I know, he said. I made the call because it was the right call, she said. That doesn't mean... She stopped. Something moved across her face. My father used to say that the right call and the easy call are almost never the same thing, and if they are, you probably haven't thought about it hard enough. Ethan was quiet for a moment. He sounds like he was a good man, he said. She looked at him. Something shifted in her face, brief, unguarded, the expression of someone hearing a true thing said plainly. He was, she said. At 0310, the response team arrived. 3 vehicles, military, moving fast on the access road from the south gate. They came with lights, but without sirens. Professional, purposeful, the kind of arrival that communicated urgency without performance. 8 personnel in the first vehicle, 4 from the IG office, 2 JAG officers, a senior medical officer, and a specialist. The second vehicle had a technical team, 4 people with equipment cases who went directly to the equipment bay without speaking to anyone. The third vehicle held 2 individuals who didn't identify themselves to Ethan and whose credentials, when he asked, bore a classification marker he'd seen exactly once before in his career. They went directly to Cross. Ethan watched them talk to Cross in the corner of the operations room, watched Cross's expression as they spoke, watched the moment when Cross understood the scope of what had already happened, what calls had already been made, what information had already moved, how far up the chain the night's events had climbed while he'd been sitting at a table in a desert facility waiting for a response team that turned out not to be coming alone. Cross's composure didn't collapse. It wasn't built to collapse, but it changed, subtly, permanently, like a load-bearing element that has found its limit without failing and will never quite carry the same weight again. The medical officer came to Maya. She was brisk and professional and spoke to Maya the way you speak to someone you're treating rather than assessing, a distinction that mattered. She checked temperature, hydration, asked about the last time she'd eaten, checked her hands and eyes with a small light. Maya submitted to this with the patience of someone who understood it was necessary and was willing to be patient about necessary things. She needs sleep, the medical officer told Ethan afterward quietly. Real sleep, not a 2-hour debrief nap. I'll recommend that formally. How is she otherwise? The medical officer looked at Maya, who was across the room accepting a bottle of water from one of the JAG officers, with a politeness that had the particular quality of someone raised to be polite even when they are running on fumes. Physically, she's fine. Otherwise, she paused. She's 17. She's been carrying something significant for a long time. That kind of weight leaves marks you don't always see in a quick assessment. Pause. She needs people around her who understand what she's been through. Are there programs? Ethan started. There will be, the medical officer said. Once this is formally open, there will need to be. She moved on to the contractor Briggs, who had been brought down from the tower and was sitting in the corridor. The 2 men from the east perimeter had arrived by then as well, brought in by the response team's advance element, alive, both of them, one with a shoulder wound and one with a leg wound that had been field dressed. Professionals who had taken hits and not bled out in the desert, which was its own kind of luck. Ethan didn't know what he felt about that. He filed it somewhere he'd look at later. The technical team spent 40 minutes with the device before one of them came out of the equipment bay and located the senior IG officer. Ethan was close enough to hear fragments of what was said. Authentication confirmed, chain of custody documentation intact. The encryption was Daniel Vale's personal protocol. The timestamp integrity was verifiable. He heard the words comprehensive and admissible and 6 years in close proximity, and then the IG officer nodded, and the technical specialist went back to the equipment bay. At 0407, one of the JAG officers found Ethan in the corridor. Sergeant Cole? She was young, late 20s, sharp-eyed, carrying a tablet and a legal pad. I need to take your statement. Formal on-record account of the night's events. You're not under investigation. You're a witness and the senior military officer present for the relevant events. This will be used to establish the factual record. Now? He said. If you're able, the sooner the better, while the sequence is fresh. He was very tired. All right. They sat in the corridor, the same corridor where Maya had told him her father's name, where the fluorescent tube still hummed its one annoying frequency. And he gave her the account from the beginning. The vehicle arrival, Cross's presentation of the candidate, the evaluation sequence, the file details, the comm anomalies, the perimeter contacts, the events on the tower platform. He was careful and complete, and he told it straight, without editorial, the way his training had taught him. Just the sequence of events and what he'd observed and what decisions he'd made and why. When he got to the Barrett, the JAG officer paused in her note-taking. She looked up. To confirm, you gave the candidate authorization to engage the perimeter contacts. I told her to take the shot, he said. With what understanding of the threat status? The perimeter contacts were moving through the culvert in tactical formation toward personnel inside this facility. We had a communication intercept suggesting they were operating under Colonel Cross's direction to prevent the candidate from leaving. We had no functioning satellite comms, and the perimeter had been compromised. And you assessed lethal response as proportionate. He thought about the question carefully, not because he wanted to soften the answer, but because it was a real question and deserved a real answer. I assessed that the candidate was the person best positioned to neutralize the immediate threat, given the geometry and the conditions, and that the immediate threat was real. You assessed the candidate's capability as sufficient. She'd just run a full variable conditions marksmanship series in crosswind and reduced illumination. Yes, I assessed her as capable. The JAG officer wrote, she didn't editorialize. She was doing her job the way professionals did their jobs, thoroughly, without personal commentary. He respected it. One more thing, she said. You gave the authorization knowing the candidate is 17 years old and a civilian. He held her gaze. She was the best person for the shot, he said. Under those conditions, in that geometry, at that moment. Yes. The JAG officer looked at him for a moment. Then she wrote it down. Mom. Cross was escorted to one of the response vehicles at 0450. He walked out of the operations room between the two unidentified personnel with the bearing of a man who understands that his bearing is now the only thing he controls, so he controls it completely. He didn't look at Maya when he passed her in the corridor. He looked straight ahead. She watched him pass. She stood in the corridor with her arms at her sides and watched him walk out the door and across the lot and into the vehicle, and the door closed, and he was gone. She stood there for a moment after the vehicle door closed. Ethan stood nearby and didn't say anything, because he'd learned something in the last several hours about when Maya Voss needed words and when she needed something else. She needed something else right now, just the moment, just the fact of it. After a while, she turned. She looked at Ethan. "The others in the program," she said. "The other 31. "It's in the evidence," he said. "Names, identities, everything your father recorded. The IG team has it now." "They're going to find them?" "That's what IG does." She nodded slowly. She looked at the door Cross had walked through. "Some of them won't want to be found," she said. "They'll have built lives around whoever Cross made them. They won't know who they were before." "That's going to be someone else's problem to work through," Ethan said. "Above my grade." "I know." She paused. "I just want to make sure someone knows that it's not simple." "I'll make sure the JAG officer knows." She nodded. Torres appeared in the doorway at the end of the corridor. He looked at Ethan, then at Maya. He was holding 2 cups of coffee. Real coffee from the operations room machine, which Ethan hadn't known was functional. He held them out. "It's bad," he said. "The machine's been here since the Clinton administration, but it's hot." Maya took one. She held it with both hands and looked at it for a moment the way you look at something small and ordinary when you've been in the vicinity of very large things for a long time. "Thank you," she said. Torres nodded. He disappeared back into the operations room without saying anything else. Ethan took the other cup and stood in the corridor with Maya, and they drank bad coffee in silence for a few minutes, while outside the desert began its slow gray conversion from night into morning. The Christmas lights on the tower were still going, green and red and irregular, blinking their patternless signal to nobody. "How long have those been up?" Maya asked, looking at the tower through the corridor window. "Nobody knows," Ethan said. She looked at them for a moment. "That's kind of sad." "Or nobody could be bothered to take them down," he said. She thought about this. "That's also kind of sad." He almost laughed. Not quite. Something close to it. At 0512, the senior IG officer found Ethan and told him formally that Colonel Adrian Cross had been placed under investigative detention pending review of the evidence recovered from the device in the facility. She told him that the 2 wounded contractors were in stable condition and had been transported to a military medical facility under custody. She told him that Briggs had agreed to cooperate with the investigation in exchange for consideration in prosecution. She told him that the 3rd perimeter contact, the one who had run, had been located by the response team 3 miles north of the facility, sitting on a rock in the desert, and had surrendered without incident. She told him he'd done good work tonight. He said thank you because there wasn't much else to say to that. She told him Maya would need to go with the response team in the morning, not as a detainee, as a protected witness, a distinction she made carefully and repeated once. There were protocols for minors in situations like this. There were facilities. There were people who handled specifically this. She would not be alone in it. Ethan went back to the operations room and told Maya. She received it with the same quiet that she received most things. She asked one question. "Can I have a few minutes first?" "Yes," he said. She went outside. He watched her through the window. She walked to the edge of the range staging area and stood in the open, looking east, looking at the sky that was going gray now, and the way it went gray before color came back to it. The wind had dropped. Just a little. Enough that the sand wasn't flying anymore, just sitting on the ground where it had landed. She stood out there alone for about 10 minutes. When she came back in, she had the same face she'd had all night, controlled, steady, the face she'd built over years of necessity. But there was something slightly different in it, something that had shifted a fraction in those 10 minutes in the open air. Not lighter. He wasn't going to describe it as lighter because that was too simple for what had actually changed. More like something that had been wound very tight for a very long time had been released one turn. One turn out of however many. But real. She walked past Ethan into the operations room. The team was there, Voss. All 6 of them, various states of exhaustion, all of them awake. none of them having slept. They looked up when she came in. Nobody said anything. Maya stopped in the middle of the room. She looked at the 6 men, at Webb with his arms crossed and his jaw still set, but his eyes different than they'd been 8 hours ago. At Carrera with his wrapped forearm and his motorcycle magazine sitting untouched on the table. At Torres, who had found a second cup of bad coffee somewhere. At Rourke, who had been on and off the landline for 3 hours without complaint. At Haskell, who had spent the night at the door doing the unglamorous work of being present. At all of them. "I know this wasn't what your duty shift was supposed to be," she said. Webb uncrossed his arms. He didn't say anything. He looked at her for a long moment, and his face did something honest and unguarded that Ethan had never seen Webb's face do in 2 years of working alongside him. Then he nodded. That was all. Just a nod. But it was the nod of a man who has revised a judgment entirely, from one end to the other, and is acknowledging the revision without making it complicated. Maya looked at him. She nodded back. Outside, the sky was going pink at the edges, the first real color since midnight, coming up slow and cold over the desert from the east. The Christmas lights on the tower blinked on in the new light, which made them look even more absurd and somehow also more like exactly what they were. A small, pointless, human thing in the middle of a large, impersonal darkness, still going, not because anyone had decided to keep them going, but because nobody had gotten around to stopping them. The response team's vehicles were still in the lot when the sun finally cleared the eastern ridge. It came up the way desert suns came up in winter, fast and flat and without warmth, turning the scrubland from gray to ochre in about 4 minutes, throwing long shadows from the range barriers and the tower and the fence posts that stretched west across the sand like they were trying to reach something. The Christmas lights on the tower disappeared into the daylight. Not gone, still blinking, probably, just swallowed by a brightness that made them irrelevant. Ethan stood at the window of the operations room with his 3rd cup of bad coffee and watched the light change and thought about sleep, which he was not going to get for several more hours. The room behind him had the particular quality of a space that has held a lot of adrenaline and is now in the process of expelling it. People sitting in chairs they hadn't chosen carefully, conversations happening in lower registers than they'd been happening in 3 hours ago. The specific flatness that settled over a team when the acute phase of something difficult had passed, and what remained was the long administrative tail of it. Maya was asleep. One of the IG officers had found a cot in the equipment bay. The facility kept a few for range staff during extended training cycles, and Maya had accepted it without argument, which told Ethan more about how tired she was than anything she could have said. She'd been asleep for 40 minutes. Someone had put a field jacket over her. He didn't know who. He hadn't asked. Carrera came up beside him at the window. They stood there for a moment without talking, looking at the desert and the new light. "You know they're going to review your call," Carrera said. "I know." "The Barrett, authorizing a miner to engage armed contacts." "I know," Ethan said. "You comfortable with that?" He thought about it honestly. Not for show. Carrera was asking a real question and deserved a real answer. "I'm comfortable with the fact that those 2 men are alive," he said. She put both rounds in non-lethal positions, shoulder and leg. At 900 meters, in the dark, in crosswind. He paused. "That wasn't accident." Carrera was quiet for a moment. "She aimed to wound." "Yes." "You knew she would." Ethan looked at his coffee. "I assessed she was capable of a precise shot. I didn't know what she'd choose to do with that precision until afterward." "But you trusted the precision." "I trusted the precision," he said. Carrera nodded. He looked out the window at the desert where the shadows were shortening as the sun climbed. "She's going to be okay," he said. "Whatever comes next, she's going to be okay." It wasn't a prediction. It was the assessment of someone who had been watching her all night and had arrived at a conclusion. Ethan didn't disagree. The formal debrief began at 0900. It was held in the largest room in the facility, the range briefing room, which had a long table and chairs and a whiteboard that someone had cleared of old range schedules. Colonel Hahn ran it. She was methodical and unhurried and created a structure around the session that felt less like an interrogation and more like a careful reconstruction. She wanted sequence and observation, not interpretation. She had two people taking notes and one recording audio. Maya sat across the table from Han with a JAG officer named Captain Delaney beside her. Delaney was young, but clearly competent. She'd reviewed the situation summary on the drive in and had been speaking quietly with Maya for 20 minutes before the debrief began. Whatever she'd said had been useful. Maya came to the table with the same composure she'd worn all night, but it sat differently on her now. Less armor, more ground. The difference between a wall you've built to keep things out and a floor you're standing on. Han opened with the procedural matters. She established the formal record, confirmed Maya's identity and status, confirmed the presence of legal representation. She explained the process, what today was, what would follow, what Maya's rights were in the context of the investigation. Maya listened. She asked two clarifying questions, both specific and procedural, which made Delaney look at her sideways in a way that suggested Delaney was recalibrating her read on the person sitting next to her. Then Han said, "I'd like you to walk me through the device, not the contents. The technical team is handling authentication of the contents. I want to understand how it came to be in your possession and what you understood it to contain." Maya folded her hands on the table. "My father gave it to me the night before he disappeared," she said. "He came to my room. It was late. I was pretending to be asleep, and he knew it. He always knew. He sat on the edge of the bed, and he told me he needed me to hold something for him. He said it was important. He said if anything happened to him, I needed to find a way to get it to people who could use it correctly." A pause. "He said I'd know when I'd found them." "Did he explain what was on the device?" "Not specifically. He said it was evidence of something that shouldn't exist. He said the people involved were powerful and careful, and that the only way to stop them was to take away their ability to make the evidence disappear." She paused. He'd been working on the documentation for months. Cross didn't know how complete it was. "How do you know that?" "Because if Cross had known, he wouldn't have waited 6 years. He would have come for me sooner." She said it without drama. Just the logic of it, clean and unsentimental. "He thought my father had partial records, fragments, things that were suggestive but not conclusive. He needed to know if I had the rest." "And the evaluation invitation," Han said. "That was Cross's way of assessing whether you were still a threat." "Yes, but he underestimated one thing." "What?" Maya looked at her hands. "He thought I was afraid of him," she said. "He spent his whole career using fear as a management tool. It's how the program ran. You create enough uncertainty, enough dependency, and people don't ask questions." She looked up. "My father wasn't afraid of him. That's why he had to disappear. And I stopped being afraid of him when I was about 14. A pause. "Once you stop being afraid of something, it becomes a problem you can plan around." Han studied her for a long moment. "You planned this for 3 years," Han said. "The specific execution took 3 weeks," Maya said. "The preparation took longer." "You were 14 when you started preparing." "I was 11 when I started thinking about it," Maya said. 14 when I started doing something about it." The room was quiet. Han wrote something on her notepad. She looked at it. She looked at Maya. Then she set her pen down in a way that suggested the formal portion of that particular line of questioning was complete, and what she was about to say next was something else. "Emma?" she said. Maya looked at her. "I want you to understand something clearly, and I want it on the record." Han's voice was still measured, still professional, but it had shifted into a register that was more direct, more human. "What you did tonight, carrying this evidence, planning this, walking into this facility knowing what Cross intended, that required a quality of courage that most adults, most trained adults, never develop." She paused. "What was done to you, and to your father, was wrong. Completely and fully wrong. And the people responsible are going to answer for it." Maya held her gaze. Something moved across her face. Not tears, nothing that simple. The particular expression of someone hearing a thing confirmed that they've known to be true for a very long time, but have never heard said out loud by anyone in a position of authority. She nodded. "Once." "Thank you," she said. Her voice was steady, barely. The debrief ran until midday. When it ended, Maya came out of the briefing room with Delaney and found Ethan in the corridor. She stopped when she saw him. She looked like she'd been running a very long race and had just crossed a finish line that had been moved several times during the race and still wasn't sure it was actually over. "How did it go?" he asked. "Long," she said. "Did Delaney do okay by you?" Maya glanced at Delaney, who was a few steps behind and giving them space. "She's good," she said. "She actually listened." Ethan nodded. He looked at her for a moment, at the field jacket that was still too big on her, at the dark circles under her eyes, at the face that had been composed and controlled for 9 straight hours and was now just tired. "The technical team confirmed the device," he said. "Everything authenticated. Chain of custody is solid." She exhaled slowly. It was the first time all night he'd seen her exhale like that, fully, all the way, without immediately pulling the air back in against the next thing. "The others," she said. "The 31. IG is already building a working group," he said. "They're going to use the asset files your father documented as a starting point. It's going to take time. Some of the identities were buried deep, but they have the foundation now. Some of them have been living as different people for years," she said. "It's not going to be clean." "No," he agreed. "It's not going to be clean. But they'll be found." "They'll be found," he said, "and they'll have a choice. That's what your father was trying to give them, a choice." She looked at the floor, then at the window at the end of the corridor, at the desert outside, at the flat winter light on the sand. "He would have been glad it was Christmas," she said. Ethan frowned slightly. "Why?" Something crossed her face, brief, real, the shadow of a thing that had once been ordinary and was now precious specifically because of how far away ordinary had gotten. "He always said Christmas was the best day to do something that mattered. He said the world was paying less attention." A pause. "He was kind of like that, finding the angle on things." Ethan thought about that, about a military intelligence officer, careful and methodical, who had taught his daughter to shoot at a range outside Annapolis and had told her that the most dangerous weapon was the truth someone feared, and who had sat on the edge of her bed on the worst night of her life and asked her to carry something that was too heavy for an 11-year-old and had also somehow given her everything she needed to carry it. "He did good," Ethan said. "Whatever else he got wrong or right, he did good by you." Maya looked at him. Her jaw tightened once, held, released. "I know," she said. They took her at 1400, a different vehicle than the one that had taken Cross. Smaller, unmarked, a driver and one escort who introduced themselves by name and showed ID and were patient about it, which Maya had clearly been briefed to expect and check for. Delaney was going with her to the processing facility in Virginia. That had taken some back and forth in the morning's administrative machinery, but Delaney had been firm about it and Hahn had backed her. The team gathered outside without being asked to. All 6 of them, in the lot, in the cold noon air. Carrera with his wrapped forearm, Torres with his hands in his jacket pockets, Webb with his arms at his sides, and his face doing the honest thing it had started doing somewhere around 3 in the morning and hadn't stopped. Rourke and Haskell standing together, not saying anything. Maya came out of the facility with her duffel bag, the same one she'd arrived with, single strap, both hands. She stopped when she saw them all assembled and looked down the line of them and then back at Ethan. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "We know," Webb said. She looked at him. She hadn't expected that from Webb specifically. Ethan could see it in the slight shift of her expression. Webb uncrossed his arms. He reached into his jacket and produced a small patch, the kind that operators collected and traded, Velcro-backed, a subdued color design. He held it out. "Range team made these. Some unit that ran a winter exercise here 4 years ago left a bunch behind. We found a box of them in the equipment bay last month." He paused. "Desert Knoll, it's stupid." Maya looked at the patch. It was green and tan, small, a simple design. A Christmas tree made of crossed rifles over a desert horizon. Below it, the words, "Desert Knoll" in block letters. She took it. She held it for a moment, looking at it in her palm. Then she put it in her jacket pocket, carefully, in the pocket that had held the device for 6 years, the pocket she kept checking through the night. Now the device was with the technical team, and the pocket had a small Velcro patch in it instead. She looked up at Webb. "Thank you," she said. Webb nodded. The nod of a man who is done talking and has said what he needed to say. Torres stepped forward. He extended his hand. Maya shook it. Firm, brief, the handshake of someone who had been raised to do it properly. Torres nodded and stepped back. Carrera, Rourke, Haskell, each of them brief, each of them present in the way that mattered. She reached Ethan last. She stopped in front of him. She looked up at him with the face she'd been wearing all night, controlled, clear, the face she'd built. And then she set the duffel down at her feet, and she did something that surprised him. She stepped forward and hugged him. Not long, not emotional in the way that announced itself. Just a brief, firm, genuine thing, the way you hug someone when you're too tired for words and the words wouldn't be enough anyway. He put a hand on her shoulder for a second. She stepped back, picked up the duffel. "You reminded me I was still a person," she said. "Not an asset, not a case file. A person." She said it straight, without decorating it, the same way she said everything. That mattered. He didn't have an answer for that was worthy of it, so he said, "Take care of yourself." "You too," she said. She got in the vehicle. Delaney was already inside. The door closed. The vehicle moved out of the lot, turned south on the access road, and Ethan watched it until it was a shape in the distance and then a suggestion of dust and then nothing. Behind him, Webb said, "Hell of a Christmas." "Yeah," Ethan said. "You think she'll be all right?" Ethan watched the access road where the vehicle had been. The desert sat there unchanged, the same flat sand and scrub and rock formation it had been all night, indifferent to everything that had happened on it. "I think she'll be exactly what she decides to be," he said. "Whatever that is." The formal investigation took 11 months. Colonel Adrian Cross was charged on 14 counts spanning unauthorized program operation, falsification of military records, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to suppress material evidence. The trial was closed to the public, classified proceedings, sealed record, but the outcome was not. He was convicted on 11 of the 14 counts and sentenced to 17 years in a federal military facility. The 3 remaining counts were dismissed on jurisdictional technicalities that his defense team had spent the majority of the 11 months constructing. He served the first year in a standard facility and was then transferred for reasons that the official record described as administrative, and that people who knew how these things worked understood to mean that certain information had become relevant to other ongoing investigations, and Colonel Cross had decided, at some point in his first year, that cooperation was a more useful posture than silence. The Veil program was formally disbanded and classified as an unauthorized operation. The 31 individuals documented in Daniel Veil's evidence files were identified over the course of 14 months. Some were found quickly. Their identities had been only partially obscured and the records pointed clearly. Others took longer. 3 of them were never definitively confirmed, either because the records were incomplete or because they had built lives that were, by that point, more real to them than whatever they'd been before, and they had declined contact in ways that were difficult to challenge legally. 22 of the 28 confirmed individuals accessed the support resources the working group established. Some took the restored identities. Some kept the ones they'd built. Some took neither and built a third. The working group, which ran for 2.5 years, documented the process as best it could. Imperfectly, incompletely, the way things got documented when the situation was genuinely unprecedented, and the people involved were navigating it without a map. Captain Delaney filed a 40-page supplemental report on the legal and ethical framework for minor witnesses in covert program investigations, which became a training reference document at the JAG school and which cited in its opening section a specific case from Christmas Day at a desert training facility as the organizing example of why the framework was necessary. Ethan Cole received a formal commendation for his handling of the incident and an unofficial note from Colonel Hahn that said, in its entirety, "Good instinct. Trust it." He framed neither document. He put both in a drawer in his desk at his next duty station, where he found them 2 years later when he was packing to move and held them for a moment before putting them in a box labeled "Keep." The disciplinary note that had sent him to Black Ridge for holiday duty was quietly removed from his record by someone at a level above his chain of command who didn't explain why and didn't need to. Webb made senior chief 14 months later. At the promotion ceremony, in the brief remarks that tradition allowed, he said nothing about Black Ridge. He said other things, thanked people, made a joke that landed, kept it short, but afterward, when the ceremony was done and people were moving toward the reception, he stopped Ethan in the corridor and said, very quietly and only once, "I was wrong about her. From the start. I was wrong." Ethan said he knew. Webb nodded. That was all they said about it. The letter came 8 months after Christmas. Standard mail, no return address, postmarked from a city in the Pacific Northwest. Ethan almost put it aside with the other administrative mail, and then didn't, for no reason he could articulate. He opened it. Inside was a single photo and a folded note. The photo was Maya. Older by 8 months, while not dramatically but visibly, the way 8 months of not running looks different from 8 months of running. She was standing outside somewhere, trees, overcast sky, the kind of light that was specific to the Pacific Northwest. She was wearing a jacket he didn't recognize. She looked directly at the camera with an expression that was not a performance of anything, just her face looking at the camera. There was a small Velcro patch on the jacket's left chest. Desert Noel. He looked at it for a long time. The note was short. 3 sentences. I got my name back. Emma Vale. I thought you should know. He folded the note and put it with the photo and put them in his jacket pocket where he carried things he needed to keep close, and he sat at his desk for a few minutes doing nothing, which was unusual for him. Then he got up and went back to work. Years later, people who followed military marksmanship would come to know Emma Vale's name from the records she set, the programs she entered at 18, the scores that required verification before they were accepted, the particular quality of her shooting that coaches and analysts and other elite marksmen described in various ways that all circled the same thing. She didn't shoot like she was trying to win. She shot like missing was a thing she'd decided at some early point in her life was not an option. But Ethan Cole remembered her differently than the records did. He remembered a girl who arrived at a desert facility on Christmas Eve carrying 6 years of her father's evidence and her own unspent grief and a plan that had been built on the premise that the truth, properly placed, was more durable than any weapon that could be brought against it. He remembered her standing at a window in a bad fluorescent light telling him her father's name like it was a thing she'd been waiting to say to the right person. He remembered her on a tower platform in the dark and the wind, making a choice about precision that most trained operators would not have had the steadiness or the mercy to make. He remembered a Velcro patch in a jacket pocket, and bad coffee drunk in a corridor, and a brief and genuine hug from someone too tired for words. He remembered that she had thanked him for reminding her she was a person. He thought sometimes about what it meant that she'd needed reminding. He thought about what it meant that she'd held on to that reminder. And he thought, not often, but sometimes, on the specific kind of night that made you think about things. About a man named Daniel Vale who had sat on the edge of his daughter's bed on the worst night of their lives and asked her to carry something impossible, and had also, somehow, given her everything she needed to carry it. That was the thing nobody put in the records. The thing that didn't fit in a file or a commendation or a trial transcript. That a father had loved his daughter well enough to make her capable of surviving the thing he couldn't protect her from. And that she had. They will try to turn you into whatever is useful to them. The only thing they cannot take, if you refuse to give it, is the knowledge of who you were before they tried.